And you are now live, Chair.
Thank you, Dorothy. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee. It is October the 3rd, and I've got my clock. It's 1:33. I first of all would like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located on Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges that the peace and friendship treaties signed in the territory and recognize that here in HRM, we are all treaty people. Before we go to approval of minutes, maybe we just do a roll call. Just make sure everybody's mic's working from the committee members. Councillor Morris, are you with us?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, and everybody on the call. Joining you from Clayton Park this afternoon.
Lovely Clayton Park. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mayor, how are things in your neck of the woods?
Wonderful, Mr. Chair. Great afternoon here in beautiful Fall River, part of District 1, Waverley Fall River, Musquodoboit Valley.
Outstanding. And I understand that Councillor Austin is on his way, and Councillor Lovelace will be joining us. She's just a few minutes late, probably knocking on something. I don't know what that would be, but anyhow, yeah, I'm sure she's on the way. So great. Let's first up is the approval of the minutes from August the 1st. You have a move of approval of those minutes, please. Councillor Morris, second by Councillor the Deputy Mayor. All those in favor?
Right.
Now we have official minutes. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. So are there any changes to the order of business additions or deletions?
No additions or deletions have been received by the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. Deputy Mayor, so you're moving, go ahead. Seconded by Councillor Morris. All in favor? We now do have an agenda. Any business arising out of the minutes? Seeing none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Seeing none. Motions of reconsideration and rescission and deferred business and table matters all in the none category. Madam Clerk, are there any correspondence or petitions?
No correspondence or petitions have been received for this meeting, Chair.
Thank you. From the committee? Seeing none. And then we're going to move to presentations. Just before we go to presentations, again, just to acknowledge that we apologize that, I see Councillor Stoddard has joined us. Councillor Stoddard, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The reason we're doing this virtually is because the City Hall Chambers is under renovations, and so which will all be nice and spiffy and new technology when we come back after the election, and hopefully we'll all be coming back after the election. Let's move on to the presentations. We do have a presentation, 10.3.1, Shalom Mandeville, experimental beach reclaiming, utilizing scallop shells enclosed in forest bags. I'm very eager to find out. Shalom, are you with us? What that was all about? Shalom, can you just adjust your camera a little bit? I see the top of your forehead. There you go. Awesome. There you go. Welcome. Good to see you, sir. It's always a pleasure to have you come to present. You have 10 minutes, and as your time is winding down, the clerk will jump in and give you a heads up that your time is almost ready to expire. Shalom, do you have a presentation, or is it all verbal?
Dorothy has my,
presentation?
Yes.
Yeah. So if the clerk, Madam Clerk, if you would mind bringing up Shalom's slide deck, that'd be great. And all you have to do, Shalom, is just ask her to advance the slide when you're ready. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Dorothy. Shalom, okay. The floor is yours, sir. You have 10 minutes, and welcome.
Thank you. My name is Shalom Mandeville. I'm speaking on behalf of an old group which was formed during the 1970s called Soil and Water Conservation Society of Metro Halifax. Just to give a very short background, and some of you councillors have known me from before, you have seen me doing the public participation, and we started the group at the suggestion of the Department of Environment because they couldn't handle these things. So we did a lot of things mostly about phytoplankton and zooplankton and others, mostly biological limnology. And so we used to hold meetings all around the HRM. We studied almost all of the lakes in HRM, which is around 1,000 lakes and ponds, over 1 hectare in size. At one of the meetings, we were approached from residents of Maynard Lake, and they said they approached the HRM's, recreation people to see if they can open the beach again, because Maynard Lake used to be a public beach when City of Dartmouth was around. And then they closed it, shut it down permanently, just like the First Lake Sackville Beach, Kinsman Beach. So very quickly, I didn't even recognize, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the ESSC, the staff, and especially Dorothy Mapanga, who really spoon-fed me for the meeting. So what happened, we carried out what's called biological source tracking. If you can move the slide to number 2, please, Dorothy. Okay, she's a world-class scientist from where? From the State University of Oregon. And the reason I selected her is because she's got so many papers published in top, water quality, not water quality, in microbiology journals. And anyway, so actually I was able to get HRM staff on board. It was a part of what's called I wrote it down somewhere, but I can't read my own handwriting. But anyway, it was the Public Works Department headed by Kulwinder Dillon. They're all retired now, and so they funded this study by Professor Kate Field, which was very small amount of money because she knew we were a volunteer group, so she only charged $4,000, and her results showed that all of the samples near the beach indicated, bird feces. About 50% samples showed human sewage, and none of them showed dogs. As you know, they're talking a lot about dogs and HRM's website, but there was no dog feces found. So based on that, HRM staff carried out a very extensive, study of the sewers and cross connections and homes and everything, and they found nothing. Okay, and that's when a very smart engineer by the name of Renee Robert, she's with Halifax Water now. As you know, they were all transferred to Halifax Water. Many of them are retired, but Renee is around. She sent me a document about using scallop shells, and I sent that to all of you. And if you can go in the next slide, please. Okay, and the beauty of this is because you don't have to worry what the sources are. You can use these scallop shells and clam shells to cut down on fecal coliforms, as well as the conductivity. That's a side by benefit. And this had the support of top scientists of the National Research Council on Oxford Street. I put the names in, but I won't go through that because we're already halfway across. So next slide, please. Now, these were called the three amigos. They were students at Dalhousie University, and they were supported by the National Research Council. So they did a lot of the work. It wasn't by me. Next page, please. Okay, this is Maynard Lake. I don't know if you can see my pointer. Can you? Hello?
We can't see your pointer, but
okay, nope. That's okay. The main street is Portland Street, and the side street is Lakefront Road. And you can see where it says Station 3. That's the main station, and it's the beach. That was a public beach one time. Station 2 is at the end of a culvert. And next page, please. Okay, the sampling was done during 2002 and 2003. it doesn't show, no, 2001 and 2002. Some of it was done by HRM, some of my group, and you can see the fecal coliforms, how high they are, extremely high. Even though at that time it was 200 per single sample and 100 on a geometric mean, which is half the values now. As you know, the Health Canada has toughened up on the regulations. Next page, please. Okay, so these three young amigos, as they call, they put in this clean scallop shells, which you can get for free in porous bags, and they put them around the beach. And look at the fecal coliform, how drastically they reduced. Number 3 is the main thing. It was within standard at that time, which was 200 on a single sample and 100 on a group of samples. Station 2 is across from the culvert. And the engineers thought that a lot of pollution is coming through the culvert, but it's not so. We didn't do any more samplings because the fund ran out and the interest just died out, because we were more into, chlorophyll A and phytoplankton and everything rather than this. Next page, please. Now, this system was originally used in McIntosh Run in Spryfield and at the Springfield Lake Sewage Treatment Plant, and they had fantastic results. And I've sent all that information to the Dorothy, and I think she gave them to all of you members as well as staff. Next page, please. And I just put the, excerpts from those studies by those three people. And they were supported, as I said, by the scientists at the National Research Council, and that gave it credibility. And I won't go through that because we will run out of time. Next page, please. Is this the next page? Hello?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Okay. Now, I gave in the abstract summary, and a counselor for District 5, who is my counselor, will remember how this source tracking, it's called microbial source tracking now, did not properly indicate the sources. And when Halifax Water went to Lake Bannock, they couldn't see any of the problems. That's because it's only what's called library independent. There are more methods than that, and you got to do more than that. Of course, it costs more money, and then average them out. I did an extensive study for the, it was called the Environmental Management Services, which was part of I called engineering department, but it was called Public Works. Yeah, it was called Engineering Public Works, and HRM has that. Very extensive study. I did that, but that wasn't done as a volunteer. The John Shepard, who was the head of the group, paid me, and you have them in very extensive. I also took about 30 published papers in environmental microbiology, and you have them. Then next page, please. Oh, imagine, we were over. So I'm going to stop here. And once again, I thank different people in HRM who really supported us. And the reason I said this is because the TV people, the CTV and other stations have been calling me regarding fecal pollution. And that's when I remember this. And I dealt with a lot of the present staff, and they weren't aware of this, what we did back in early 2000s. They were even before, done before, what's his name? Cameron Dekoff. You remember Cameron Dekoff? And he wouldn't even be aware of this. Emma Wadi is in his position now. And that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Shalom, thank you very much. As always, I appreciate your passion, and your desire to protect our waters and our lakes. Is there any questions from the committee for the presenter? Seeing none, I just have one quick question, Shalom.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I get a sense of when you use the example around Maynard Lake and the bags of scallop shells, to what volume? I mean, how many bags? Was it around the entire lake or just that end piece you had on your slide?
Mr. Chairman, I knew you will ask the question because you asked very intelligent questions when I came there. I don't know. The students did that. And I
Okay.
tried to locate them because, as you know, you can have two people on this. And
Yeah.
I couldn't locate them. I think they're all graduated, some of them master's degree, some of them with PhD. Can you imagine? But I
Amazing.
couldn't find them when I Googled them,
Okay, no problem. I was just very curious because it's
So
interesting.
they put 3
results.
bags, I know that, along the beach.
Okay. Well, thank you very much as always. We appreciate your presentation and we look forward to the next one by all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, folks. Next is typically it's public participation. Since we are virtually, obviously, is there, Madam Chair, have anybody signed up for public participation?
Yes, we have John, and they are waiting to come in for public participation.
Okay, why don't you open the door for John? Let him come on in.
Mr. Chair, I saw in the chat there that Councillor Stoddard had something to say. Speak, please, in the chat.
For the speaker,
I wasn't sure. You might want to ask her.
Councillor Stoddard, I apologize. I didn't have my chat open, and so did you want to say something, Councillor Stoddard, while we're opening the door for John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for the previous presenter. I'm not sure.
May have lost him. I apologize. I think we've lost him. I apologize, Councillor. I didn't.
Sorry, Chair, I think he's still on the call. Just 1 second.
No problem at all, Mr. Chair.
So I apologize. Why don't we just move on, and maybe that's something offline we can reach out to him, Councillor, if you don't mind. My apologies. John, I saw your handsome face. You would mind coming back? There you are, sir. John, welcome. You've got 5 minutes if you just want to introduce yourself and tell us from what community you're from, and then the clerk will let you know when your time is almost up. So you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can. Loud and clear.
Excellent. Okay, good afternoon. My name is John Cascadden. I reside in the Birch Bear Woods community in District 13. Halifax, I see, is on the agenda today, and Action 11C details HRM's municipal solid waste issues. What's missing in Action 11C is the fact that for every year since 2015, HRM has been exporting more than 70,000 tons of municipal ICI waste that is laden with organic and polymer material. In fact, Otter Lake isn't even mentioned in the report. That organic matter, of course, degrades and becomes methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. By exporting this waste material, it really hasn't been diverted. It's just been moved on, and it still remains a climate change threat. HRM's responsibility is to manage the threat of all its municipal solid waste and not pass it on to another municipality. An emerging waste processing technology based on plasma gasification can eliminate organic and polymer material being buried in landfill, and as a bonus, marketable hydrogen can be harvested during the process. Many plasma gasification developers have demonstrated that they can harvest more than 50 kilograms of hydrogen from 1 ton of waste material. Now, for 100,000 tons of waste material, that equates to more than 5 million kilograms of marketable hydrogen. In Vancouver, hydrogen is sold at the retail pump for around $14 per kilogram. That's more than $70 million in retail value from 100,000 tons of waste material. In 2023, HRM created more than 128,000 tons of residential and ICI waste. The residuals from the plasma gasification process are non-toxic glassified material, which is suitable as an alternative to gravel for road construction. Also, there are zero toxic or greenhouse gas emissions from this process. Plasma gasification has the potential to change HRM's landfill requirements and retire the existing truck and dump operation that we presently have at Otter Lake Landfill. Only HRM Council can direct HRM CAO to have staff aggressively pursue a plasma gasification processing solution for HRM's municipal solid waste. This this committee is the stepping stone to regional council, and you have the ability to put this on the table and make this happen. I'll leave it off there. I thank you for this opportunity to participate today, and I am available to discuss this at greater detail during this meeting or anytime in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John. This is not the first time we've heard from you. We appreciate your attention to these types of items. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any questions from the committee, so again, we really appreciate it. Thank you. I expect you'll be watching the rest of the presentation.
Chair?
You do have. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor. Sorry, I was looking at this time. I was looking at the chat, and now you're sticking up your hands.
Yes,
You guys
I
quit messing
yeah.
around.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say, now we're going to do a chat, or we're going to do that. So thank you, John. Always nice to hear from you. You gave some really good information and stats there. Will you share your comments, please, with us, with the clerk's office?
I can, yes. I'll actually make a copy of my notes in PDF and send them to Dorothy.
I would appreciate that.
Would that be correct, or should I send it just to the clerk's office?
You can send it to John.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dorothy. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Excellent.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Thanks again, John. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much. You guys have a great day.
Okay, so nobody else on the list, Dorothy, for public participation?
No one else on the list today.
Okay, thank you so much. So that brings us to information reports, and we have two today. The first one, as John alluded to, is 13.1.1 Halifax 2023-24 Annual Progress Report. So I believe we have a presentation if the committee wants it. I'm looking at the committee and nodding. So if we could, we can have the presentation first, and then we can put the motion on the floor.
Thank you. And Dorothy, are you going to share the slides?
Would you like me to, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, just 1 second.
Perfect. Everyone can see that?
Yep. Yes, we
All
can.
right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of ESSC. It's really nice to be here, providing the annual report for all of the climate work we've been doing for the 23-24 year, like we've done every year since the plan passed in 2020. So I'll give a quick presentation. All the details are in the attachment A of the report. And the motion is actually to then forward it to the new incoming council for their information and awareness, along with a presentation, which would happen in November or December once the elections are complete. So we thought this would be beneficial to share with current Environment Committee and then new council going forward. So next slide, please. Just a reminder of the ambitious targets that we have in our climate plan. We're striving for net zero municipal operations by 2030, to reduce our community-wide emissions by 3/4 from our 2016 baseline year by 2030, which is in just over 5 years. to be a net zero community by 2050. We talked a lot in the early days and every day since about the business case for doing this. So we know that in the financial model for the plan, it said collectively we kind of need over the 30 years an investment of $22 billion. But that we'd be up almost double that in savings if we did everything according to plan. And there's also been more progress and research done on the benefits of acting on adaptation now versus later. So preparing ourselves more now for the types of things we've seen with flooding and hurricanes and fires, et cetera. So, the current kind of number in Canada, which I still think is probably low as we go forward, is for every dollar you spend in preparation, you're saving 15 in future impact costs. Not to mention the benefits of being more prepared, less damage, less risk to life safety, et cetera. Next slide, please. So, we've really come quite a long way since getting our plan through. We got resources, we got budget, we've grown our team substantially from maybe 5 or so when the plan went through to 30 in environment and climate, alongside other additional positions in different departments. And we're really in this phase of implementation, just really trying to move the needle, really trying to do great work and go faster than we have before to try and hit these targets in the timeline that's required. Next slide, please. And of course, there's lots of barriers to this. And, at the end of the day, people are doing great work within HRM, a lot of our partners, other levels of government, but we're not moving big enough or fast enough to be tracking to reduce our emissions even towards our 2030 target. And the barriers are not uncommon, but there's regulatory limitations, things like that we don't control building code or the Coastal Protection Act, things like that. Coordination with other levels of government is just always a challenge. Supply chain and workforce constraints that everybody's feeling. And on the internal side, there are still competing priorities across the board and resource constraints in different divisions. And it's just really complex. Being a leader in a space means that you're trying things for the first time. People are learning as they're trying. Things are, an example of the EV charging infrastructure, right? Like this is new work for Nova Scotia Power. We had to figure out how to work together and get moving on those chargers. And it took a little bit of work and we had some delays, but we're in a much better place now and moving forward. So these are the types of things that we're always striving to overcome. Next slide, please. This is just showing you the hard numbers. We report, just as a reminder, to CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project for cities annually as a requirement of the commitments we've made through the Global Covenant of Mayors and otherwise. And so this is the emissions that we control strictly as an organization. So this is our owned buildings and our fleets and our lighting and traffic lights and street lights, sport field lights. And, we are reducing. We're reducing not exponentially, but we are going down. Next slide is the community emission. So it's us plus everyone else. And that's what really matters. And that's the 3/4 target we have for 2030 and net zero by 2050. And, again, we are going down, and that's in spite of having grown quite substantially in population and more than was ever anticipated when we developed the model in the first place. So I think since the baseline year of 2016, we've gone down in our community-wide emissions by almost 18%, despite growing by 77,000 people. That said, we're tracking, if you remember the rainbow wedge diagram that we flash around all the time, I have it as an extra slide if we want to look at it later, but the top of that rainbow wedge is the business as usual scenario. And these reductions are kind of tracking even higher than what we thought would happen if we didn't do anything differently when we put the plan forward. And that's largely because of the barriers that we spoke of, the huge growth that we're facing right now, et cetera. Next slide, please. So A reminder that there are three main themes that the 46 actions are clumped into. I'm just going to talk about a couple of big highlights in the three themes. So the first one is decarbonized and resilient infrastructure. Next slide, please. And a big area of focus for us has been getting these public electric vehicle chargers in the ground and live. And this is to have a more connected network across the municipality for everybody to have more easy use of electric vehicles, to ease range anxiety, to just be more convenient, and to really lead the way in figuring out as an organization how to put in these chargers and work with all of the key partners, and to share our learnings with others so that they can do the same, private companies, etc. So the photo there is Graham's Grove, looks pretty familiar, I think, to most of you. That is a live charger that went in a number of weeks or months ago now. And people are busy on site getting those listed other 4 locations in the ground for this fall. We're focusing on level 2 charging in areas that have a lot of multi-unit residential buildings. And just as a reminder, we got some federal funding to go towards this project, just under $1 million from ZEVIP for the first 56 chargers that we're putting in. Next slide. So this photo is actually the Ragged Lake Transit Facility, and you can see the vast array of solar panels on the roof. We're really proud of this. Kevin and his team worked to coordinate this project. It's a megawatt. It may be the largest rooftop solar system in Atlantic Canada. If not, it's one of the largest in terms of capacity. And that's going to be really beneficial because the electric buses, the 60 electric buses that have been purchased are charging out of the Ragged Lake facility as part of the expansion. And so that's going to offset the energy demand and the costs, and will green the electricity for those buses charging. And I got an update from Transit yesterday that they now have 22 electric buses in their possession and are continuing to do testing and are close to rolling them out into service routes. So that's really great news. We've had other additional purchases of electric vehicles over the year. The vehicles are becoming more readily available. We just need to kind of catch up on the charging infrastructure side of things. So we're working on that. And Kevin's team alongside Corporate Fleet have come up with a whole new, really detailed rollout plan for how we're going to do that going forward. The Graham's Grove building and the Aquatic Center were both built to pretty much a net zero ready standard with lots of green features, which is really fantastic. And I talked about the Ragged Lake facility. So I think next slide, please. Second theme is prepared and connected communities. Next slide. So this is a lot about adapting and preparing for climate impact and extreme weather events. We did a really exciting pilot project with the Clean Foundation and in partnership with the town of New Glasgow to pilot resilient retrofits to homes. So looking at a home that's in an at-risk flood area and kind of mirroring how you do it on the energy side, but with flood risk. And so we worked in the neighborhoods of Spryfield and Upper Hammonds Plains for that pilot. And it was all free for the willing and engaged participants. And these homes had free flood risk reduction retrofits done. And we're waiting on a final report for that. On the coastal side of things, we got the final flood risk maps from CBCL. We've been layering all the other climate risks. Our IT GIS department's been working with us, and we've been working on developing a set of critical infrastructure that the city owns and doesn't own. And then we're going to look at the condition of that critical infrastructure and where it is. We're going to look at socioeconomic vulnerability. So our risk maps are nearing completion, which is going to guide investments in adaptation going forward through the climate action tax. Next slide, please. Because we have some funds set aside for critical infrastructure and a small bundled capital account for work that aligns with Halifax, with the climate plan, we've been reaching out through all the different departments, kind of socializing that we have financial resources to support projects to make them more climate aligned. But also when something happens to damage an asset, we have the opportunity to build back better, considering current and future climate risks. So we have a short form for applicants to access these funds, whether it's Build Back Better or just a project idea. And it's been really great to see the types of projects come through and our ability to actually improve them by paying the delta or paying design work or consulting work for these projects. And I'll highlight a couple of those in a second here. And I already talked about the critical infrastructure analysis. So next slide, we're on to our third theme of governance and leadership. Next slide, please. This is just to highlight some of the work that we're doing outside of the bounds of the organization. We're a member of and a foundational partner of the Building to Zero Exchange that launched this year, which is really bringing all of the players in the building sector together to support and mobilize them in being able to work in a green building world, to really move the needle, to be ready for building code changes, et cetera. So it's capacity building, education awareness, training, all those types of things. And fun fact, Taylor Owen is actually leading that exchange, who used to be on our climate team, if you recall. The CEO Climate Action Charter is going really well. HRM, the utilities, a lot of different consulting firms and other organizations have signed on to that, committing themselves to move further on climate action, both mitigation and adaptation. We've really been excited to be back in community post-COVID, a lot of really great public events through our libraries. We had EarthFest in and around Earth Day, really trying to make climate action accessible to everybody, and to drive support and action in that way. We've also been exploring a climate equity framework internally and working on how we actually move towards a just transition in this through this climate plan implementation, and have been working closely with our African Nova Scotian communities, with Everyone Every Day and lots of other organizations and nonprofits, and partnering on a lot of these engagement events, which has been really fantastic. And youth has been a big focus this past year. We had some money through Bloomberg as a result of Mayor Savage going to COP, and we got $50,000 to kind of run a climate action challenge for youth and youth serving organizations. All of the winners were just announced and celebrated a couple of weeks ago, and those projects are all underway now. Next slide, please. In terms of driving action internally, we're really excited about the working groups that we've set up. So we kind of looked at the major areas of work and some of the big barriers and where the work really kind of overlaps with a lot of different departments. And we've created these structured and deeply supported working groups. So for fleet electrification, for net zero buildings, for our transit, resilient communities, critical infrastructure, and then nature-based solutions. And Natasha Winter's whole team is focused on really running these groups, really identifying barriers, really trying to move the needle. And we're lucky that our CAO, Kathy O'Toole, is the champion of Halifax and is kind of the change management sponsor for the work. Next slide, please. Just a little recap on some of where Halifax has been in the last year. With our reporting, we got an A grade again for the climate, not just the climate plan and actions, but how we're doing and how we're reporting and moving the needle on all the different areas of focus. I'm not sure if, maybe this wasn't shared before, but the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is doing a special report this year, only one special report, and it's focused on cities. So first time ever, the international body doing all the climate work is doing a special report on climate change in cities, because there is a recognition that cities need to have a seat at the table and be considered when they're talking about policies and actions and targets that have to be implemented on the ground. As you all know, in local community, where the rubber hits the road is really where we need to be focused. So that's really exciting. We also scored really highly on the Corporate Knights Sustainable Cities Index, which is nice to see across all types of environment and climate considerations. The nod to solid waste for the strategy review work that they're doing to align with the circular economy and the Halifax plan is really exciting and will be done soon. I think you recall we had storm kits for newcomers that we were giving out in advance of one of the hurricanes last year. We've actually expanded the translation of a lot of the materials into an additional 3 languages. So I think there's 7 languages that we have kind of just high level messaging around how to be prepared and safe in different extreme weather events. And you will hear a lot about our Lake Watchers program in a moment, so I won't talk about that. Next slide, please. So I'm just wrapping up here. I thought I'd just share a few little examples of how the Climate Action Pacts is being used across the organization and how it's leading to different decisions than if we didn't have it and everything was just regularly budgeted for as in the past. So this first one is battery-powered small equipment. We funded a lot of different equipment like you see here for Parks and Rec. Next slide, please. We supported the undercoating for the Rita Joe Ferry with a different application that is non-toxic. It reduces drag, so it reduces the amount of fuel you need, and it's better for the marine environment. And the team in the ferries group was so pleased with it that they're going to do it again to the next ferry, which is great. Next slide. DeWolf Park is all solar lights. So we funded a pilot to test those out so that they could see if that is what they wanted to do. And now I think we're rolling out even more solar lights because it was successful and it's reducing costs and emissions. And it's a really nice amenity in the park. Next slide. We've bought some small electric vehicles like forklifts, ice resurfacers, and street sweepers, which is nice because they're also really quiet, reduces air quality concerns, and we hear that people are really enjoying these vehicles. Next slide. This one's exciting. This is the Cole Harbour Field Stormwater Management Project. There's a field in Cole Harbour that floods regularly and also some of the homes adjacent. And we saw that in the capital plan, Parks and Rec had allotted some funds to kind of re-turf that field. And we had learned about an alternative to doing this that would maybe be more long lasting and reduce flood risk going forward from Mississauga. And we approached Parks and Rec and said, hey, would you be interested in doing something differently? We have funds, we can pay for some design work, and we can actually pay for the capital project. It would delay, fixing the field by 1 construction year. And they were really open to it, which is exciting. So this work is underway right now, not the construction, but the design, and it should be done for next field season. And last one, next slide, please, is e-bikes for parking enforcement. This was a really great project, super well received by those using the e-bikes to do it. Has led to a lot less driving by cars, so a lot less fuel and a lot less GHG reductions, or more reductions, less GHGs. And it's really easy. We heard that people really like the bikes because it's easy for them to maneuver. They don't have to also find a parking space to do this work. So it's been really great. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Shannon, thank you very much for that presentation. Outstanding. I have lots of questions, but first of all, I'm going to get the Deputy Mayor to put the motion on the floor, and I'm sure she has questions too. Deputy Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I move that the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee forward Halifax 23-24 Annual Progress Report to Halifax Regional Council for information, discussion, and a presentation.
You have a seconder for that? Councillor Stoddard is seconded. Deputy Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shannon. What an impressive year, really. so much going on, and just the variety and the breadth of it all. It is impressive. It really, really is. So I think the next council coming in, if there's new people, yeah, they use the phrase drinking from a fire hose. Well, you know what? You could spend weeks and weeks just making sure that we understand everything that your business unit does, and the impact that it's going to have on our environment. So kudos to you and the team. There is one thing though that I guess it's an observation, but so many good projects and all that kind of stuff, but I really want to see something that is rural focus as well. I do see coastal in, you know, some of the work and stuff, but when I think about, you know, District 1 being the agricultural belt and more rural, I don't really see it reflected in this year's work. I see overarching everything, but I'm hoping that maybe in the next year that we'll be able to see some examples that are more rural based. So, but impressive work. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Anything to respond, Shannon? I don't think there's any question. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Just quickly, thank you for that, Councillor. I think once we are totally done the risk mapping and we can see the hotspots of risk based on community vulnerability, the infrastructure condition, and the climate risks, it's going to really help guide our investments. And we're really going to try and do that, you know, across the board, across every district, based on priority and impact. So I think you will see more of that going forward. And just a note on, you know, the EV charging network, that really is also rural focused. And we are putting chargers to try and have a connected network really in the entire municipality. And Kevin can speak more to that if there's any specific questions. But that is definitely on our radar.
Right. I think there was going to be one charger in Middle Muscatavit, Kevin. But
pretty much Chair to the council. Yeah, we're targeting currently at Bicentennial Center and working with Nova Scotia Power for a site in Upper Muscatavit, which has been difficult for us to source just due to the lack of HRM owned property. But we are working with NSP on that. And another highlight, I suppose, is we did just install a solar energy system at the Carroll's Corner Community Center that came online, I'd say maybe a month and a half ago.
Okay.
And then just to remind folks, and I'm speaking strictly from energy because that's where I live and breathe, is we do have our Halifax Solar City program that's been running since 2016, and all residents across the municipality can participate. And I find folks in rural HRM, they really benefit due to you know, they've got large land space, some nice unobstructed roofs and so forth. So I'm happy to chat with any constituents that you have about that program as well.
Okay, one quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chair. Just if you're looking for a site in Upper Muscatavit, I know the Upper Muscatavit Community Center would be very interested.
Wonderful. We'll be in touch.
Great, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Deputy
Mr.
Mayor.
Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Shannon, for the presentation. So fantastic to see all the work going on and progress being made. Seems like wasn't too long ago we were just talking about how we were going to fund this, and now you've made so much progress in a really short time. And also, it's great to see the tangibles. You know, some of these things aren't huge in terms of the impact they have, but I think they are really important for residents to see the work that we're doing and to realize that we're making this a priority. So when they see the tangibles like the EV chargers and they see the solar lights and they see all these things, it's more, you know, it's really good for promoting the overall work that we're doing, and much of the work that you do, unfortunately, is still invisible because it's, you know, planning for critical infrastructure, or it's working on big impact projects like Ragged Lake that might be sort of out of the public eye right now. So anyway, it's great to see some of these tangibles. So I just had a few questions. I'll fire them all off if you don't mind. I wondered about the solar lighting, which I think has so many benefits beyond energy savings in terms of making our parks feel safer to people. And the low lighting is also good for wildlife. It's not really going to be interfering with birds and other wildlife. So I really think it's a good solution. But is the solar lighting going to go into the overall parks budget? Is it something that we will be able to, or the next council will be able to look at more comprehensively through the next budget. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about, you mentioned that we're not meeting our targets and that population growth is having an impact on our targets. And so if you could just talk a little bit more about that. I know that this is a huge challenge that's been placed on your shoulders, and there are all kinds of reasons why it's difficult to meet those targets, but it's important for council to know about that. So if you could just talk a little bit about that too, please.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. Thanks for your comments and your questions. The solar parks lighting is really, really great. I agree. I'm excited about it. And I think you would have just seen the parks lighting strategy go forward, or maybe it's not quite. I don't know if it hit this council or not, but we reviewed the parks lighting strategy in Report Center recently, which had some environmental components to it. And I know that the solar lighting's been well received by parks. So I don't know in terms of like how the budgeting will go, but I know if it's a focus that's approved, then it'll, whether it lives in Halifax budget or Parks budget, we'll figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah, and then in terms of our targets and tracking kind of business as usual, I think so much of it is really about how clean the grid is, and is Nova Scotia Power hitting its targets? It hasn't in the last couple of years, but it's moving fast and furious towards them, and they're doing a lot of really good and interesting work. We saw the battery energy storage projects come forward that got some, and a couple that got some funding from the Canada Infrastructure Bank with Indigenous partnerships and things like that. And they have kind of a plan for how to get to their 80% legislated clean energy target provincially. So I think as they start to succeed in moving along in those targets, it's going to really jump our numbers down. Although when you balance that with the predicted population growth and all the infrastructure growth to support it, it's really anybody's guess how that's going to all play out. And so, we're excited to look at the new transportation model that's in play now with the JRTA and HRM, really get a sense of population, like wait and see a little bit through all this flux with changes with provincial requirements and everything. And then we'll very likely rerun our model because we're close to the 5-year mark from when we developed the plan with like a better, more modern understanding of kind of the state of play in HRM.
Okay. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chair?
46 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Could you say a little bit about, I know a big component of meeting our targets is building code changes and insulating our buildings and having more energy efficient buildings. Where are we with that? I have the feeling that that is one of the things holding us back.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, yes. And so we just saw last week, the announcement that the province is back on adopting the 2020 building code. Through the Building to Zero exchange, we've heard from industry that most buildings are being built better than that 2020 code anyways. What we really need is a really clear plan towards, and I think it's 2029 for tier 3 is what the province has kind of aimed for. So that's good direction for the industry over the next number of years, 5 years. But they also really need to understand about tier 4 and 5. And we also, there's a new building code coming out. I think the 2025 building code will be coming down federally. And so, when is that going to be adopted provincially? And as you know, council requested having the ability to require better. And that wasn't palatable to the province, so which makes sense. They want it consistent across the province. So it really is out of our control. So we do what we can with our own buildings, and then we're trying to really support and influence through these partnerships, like with the Building to Zero exchange. Kevin, did you want to add anything to that? No, okay.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stoddard, do you have the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pardon me. And thank you, Shannon and your team, for this excellent report. It's really interesting how some of the numbers come together. I did have a couple of questions. Did you say that the electric chargers are live? And what is the cost to the public if they are? Because I think I mentioned to Kevin that HRM wasn't a utility, so how are we actually going to get revenue from it? And I also I was curious to know how staff was liking the electric small vehicles like the street sweeper and the saws and the other things you mentioned. If they found them, you know, a little difficult to use or the same as, the same as usual. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Great questions. And Kevin will chime in on the EV questions. The charger that's live right now is Grams Grove. The other ones are not yet complete and live, but those 4 that were listed should be done in the fall. And just a little bit on the how it's going with people that have been using vehicles. We actually got a really lovely message from the print shop manager who said, because they have an electric vehicle for all of the inter-office mail deliveries, and they're loving it, and they get questions all the time. So they actually reached out and asked for materials like Halifax and EV charging and EV vehicle materials that they could give when they get approached by the public or whoever about the vehicle. So that was a really good news story that we had recently. I haven't heard anything, I think a battery powered electric, small equipment is really, it's nice because you don't have to fill gas in them. It doesn't smell. There's no air quality issues. I use them myself and I find them great. We haven't heard any grumblings, but we haven't asked for feedback. So that's something that we can definitely circle back and do. And then, and Kevin might have a little bit more on staff user experience for EVs also. So Kevin?
Thanks, Shannon, for you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So the folks using the small equipment, like electric ice resurfacers and street sweepers, as Shannon said, we haven't heard a ton of feedback, which we feel like is a good thing. We want it to be a transition where it is just like driving a normal gas vehicle, but it is electric. With respect to the arenas, though, folks are reaching out to us to get electric street sweepers as their non-electric Zamboni, not street sweepers, sorry, ice resurfacers or Zambonis reach end of life. So we are actively transitioning those. With respect to the public chargers, yes, as Shannon mentioned, Grams Grove is online. We're hoping to wrap up the Canada Game Center install mid to late October. There might be a little bit of testing needed, but we're hoping to get that one online. So we are not a utility, so you're correct, we can't sell electricity per se, but in working with legal, we are able to sell a session. So we are selling a per minute session, and we've set fees to cover the operating costs, which includes snow clearing, our electricity cost, maintenance, and so forth. So for level 2s, currently we're charging $1.80 per hour. And for fast chargers, there are 175 kilowatt fast chargers, which is more than 3 times as fast as the Nova Scotia Power chargers that were installed in around 2018 or so. And we're currently charging $45 an hour. However, it is prorated per minute, and users likely won't be there for the full hour. Ideally, 20 to 30 minutes is standard, so you can fill your tank up, $25 to $30, which compared to gasoline, not too shabby.
Okay. Mr. Chair, do I have a couple of minutes?
You have 12 seconds.
Okay. Shannon, you're talking about those good news stories. I think it's a good idea to share the good news stories with the public. Just let them know that we're moving forward. Same as you, Kevin. Just know that we're moving forward and it's making a difference. Just hope that that's something that you're looking at for the future. Great. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I do have some questions and some comments. First of all, I don't know if you can see this, my app there, Kevin, my Switch, we use the Graham Grove charger all the time. And the other day I had to wait. What was up with that? They were both in use. So I didn't pull any fast cards to get ahead of anybody. So I'm glad to know. You know, it's interesting comment that you made about some of the folks using the HRM e-vehicles and people asking about it. I mean, I think that's a great opportunity that as we advance our fleet, that we really train our people using the electric vehicles, that they become ambassadors of it and they understand it. And so supplying not only with materials, but a little education around that. So it's great because people will inquire and we should be making sure that I think we are. It's obvious that these are e-vehicles, right? They're decal differently than any other fleet of vehicles. So I think that's really important. I just want to build on with Councillor Stoddard was just mentioning about, you know, promoting all the things that we're doing. And we've been asking for this for some time now, Shannon. And, you know, as you went through the list, I mean, it's pretty amazing, you know, the small equipment batteries, the solar lights, the Rita Joe Ferry. It's not as obvious. People wouldn't know that. The small e-forks, I think the Coal Harbor Management Stormwater, that's huge, right? That's the kind of, that substance that we're really seeing that can make a difference. The e-bikes, the parking enforcement, the list goes on and on. So is this clearly on the website that people can see it? I'd like to see a running list. I would like to see the investment associated with it also. I would also like to see the future investment of things we're looking at. And you mentioned, you know, Kevin mentioned the electronic Zambonis. I mean, you know, there are problems within the arena, especially the older arenas that exist around the province with those diesel powered Zambonis. It doesn't make sense. You're driving around with it and everybody's in that building. So really would like to see that list of things so to date that's updated on a regular basis with some costing along so they can even a running total, because we're asked as elected officials all the time, where's the money going, right? Where's the money going? And we speak up to it at a high level, but, you know, and especially the big project, maybe we categorize the big project separately from the smaller projects just so people could know. I mean, Ragged Lake is a perfect example, and that's, you know, the largest solar system in Atlantic Canada, and that's something to be proud of. So just to talk about that, you know, your slide on engaged community and youth, and I was speaking to a grade 9 class at Caledonia Junior High last week, and climate change came up, and one student said, well, we can do it, 14-year-olds. And Shannon, I reminded them of that demonstration that happened a few years ago in front of City Hall, where we had thousands of students. I think Council Morris, you were there, you and I, Shannon, the mayor was there, and students marched. And I remember them coming up to me and the mayor, and maybe even yourself, Shannon, and saying, well, you guys are the adults. You're supposed to be the leaders. What are you going to do? And from that, really, it wasn't only that, but from that led to declaring a climate emergency. It led to Halifax. It led to figuring out how to pay for it. You know, that was a factor in all of that. So that's what I shared with those students. And I think they a lot of surprises from their faces. But, you know, that community engagement for everybody is important, but particularly the climate change. I do have a question about the non-province choosing not to implement a Coastal Protection Act. You hear from a lot of my colleagues across the municipality, around the province, other municipalities, that how that's a major impact to them. But could you speak to us? It's less of an impact to us, if that's correct, because we already have those bylaws in place. If you could just speak to that, that'd be great. Two other items here. I had a tour of the park on Lake Charles project last week. That's the subdivision that's off of Waverly Road. It's the Clayton Development Project, 4,900 units, 10,000 people. We had some discussion about designating a street that may be set up for solar. May not necessarily putting the solar on the buildings, on the individual houses, but setting that up. So maybe that's just a plan to see, Shannon, to offline, to have that conversation and meet with those folks, maybe even meet on site and talk about and explore that further. You're putting in such a large development size of Truro. If we could designate one street that's going to be as, you know, as green as possible, how do we do that? And there's things the municipality can do. And my last question, where do we compare? You travel the world now, Shannon, or good parts of the world, in corners of the world, talking about Halifax. where do we compare with other cities and other municipalities on what we're doing? So there are some of my points and some questions and all that too. Thanks.
Making me work here. Excellent questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I love the idea of the running list of projects and costs being on our website. We started putting the running list and status of the EV chargers on our website recently to try and be a little more proactive for people that were looking, and counselors as well. I should have actually talked a little bit about communications in the update, because we've been working really hard on the virtual hub. So that's a project that I mentioned a couple of times in front of council, where it actually doesn't live on halifax.ca. It's its own virtual space, and it's two-way communication. So it's not just HRM corporately trying to talk about what we're doing on climate. It's also approved partners being able to put an event in, or it's supposed to be interactive. It's a storyboard GIS approach. So Esri's what we already use. We had to buy an additional functionality for this two-way communication. They've been working on this project for quite some time, and Colleen on Kevin's team is actually, we're calling it the Halifax Hub, Virtual Hub. And we're really hoping that it's kind of the main, like, if we do it right, if it's successful, if it's fun, maybe it will be the place that everyone knows to go to find out what's what, who's doing what, when something's happening. How do I figure out solar on my home? How do I figure out more, flood stuff, insurance stuff, just all the things that's really hard to navigate on a big organization's website. So it's meant to be adaptive and responsive to feedback. We're just kind of trying this. This all stemmed out of some comments by council when we had the resident survey that said, 83% of residents don't even know you do climate change as an organization in 2 surveys ago. I'm really excited because the resident survey is going out this month. We're going to get the same questions are being asked, as well as some others. So we're going to get new information from that. I also just sent out a very short, less than 5-minute survey to all of council on how you think climate communications have gone through your term, and looking for some feedback and what you're hearing from constituents. The other thing we did in response to, really hearing that councillors needed some support fielding questions about the climate action tax, climate action, just, within your districts, we did the community updates. So we've done, I think we're on the 5th one that's coming out next month. It's very pretty. It shows, some stories, some highlights, some issues, whatever. And so wondering if those are landing, wondering if they're getting used. So really hoping that we get that 5-minute survey filled out from councillors that are interested, just so that we can learn and adapt and keep improving going forward. Virtual Hub, this survey and the updates. So, and I think,
pick off on that, sorry, the virtual hub, I think once the election's over and you have a new council, I think by that point in time, we'll have some work, some data to show. We should be doing some sort of education with council on that, so we can be promoting it too. So good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and with new council, there's a couple of days of briefings that they get in November, and Halifax gets an hour. So really happy that we get to go in front of new council outside of the formal council process, and really kind of introduce to any new members what we're trying to do around climate change in the city. So that will be really excellent. And in terms of like the list of projects, how much we've spent, how much is committed, Fiona Fillmore on our team is our senior financial consultant. She's dedicated to all things climate finance and has every single detail down to the most granular of every single project that we've spent on, and that's committed, and our whole 10-year capital plan, as well as the operating expenses. So we'll look at that in terms of what makes sense to share on the virtual hub and on the website. But that is readily available to you upon request also. So if you want to see more details, Fiona has told me she has her spreadsheets ready. So that's great news. So moving on to the Coastal Protection Act. Yes, for HRM, we're lucky, and there was a report that went through Environment Committee on everything we're doing around coastal risk management and coastal management. There's still a lot to do, being a working harbor. and really needing to work with all the partners and landholders around the harbor on these types of things. But because we have a very sophisticated planning department and have been working on de-risking sea level rise and storm surge and hurricanes and all these things for a long time, we're in pretty good shape. It's more that it would be really great if the whole province had the same level of readiness and assistance, and we had put a lot of time into how we would work together with the province to administer the regulations, right? And it would have just been a nice consistency across the province, because some people live in one municipality and work in another, and we're always talking to each other. So but yes, we're pretty good on that. Lake Charles, that's really interesting. The Port Wallace development you're referring to. Yeah, we've talked with planning a lot on what we are allowed to require and not when we think about fuel sources for homes, district energy systems. Can we require solar? Like, we unfortunately don't have powers like that. If there was a willingness of the developer to do some green things above and beyond, super excited at that, and would be really willing to have some conversations. We've spoken with Clayton before about some of their green thinking, and
I think things have, progressed. The buildings are going up, and now's the time to again go back and have that conversation. So I'll follow up offline.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
The last question was the other in comparison to others.
Yeah, I think we're doing great. And I say this not just, I'm not making this up, because we're sought out for sharing our learnings, sharing how we got the climate action tax, how we're administering it, how we're being transparent around it. Like, that's probably the biggest one. The Building Back Better program, how we're trying to mainstream climate action across the departments, like some of the really sticky stuff that we're trying. The other environmental leaders in Canadian cities are very interested. And so my team and I are on, many a conference, panel, virtual presentation. We even presented on the climate action tax to all of the CFOs of British Columbia municipalities. So that's been fantastic. And, we're on people's radar internationally. I got to go to Latvia for that IPCC scoping exercise for this climate change in cities report. And I got to actually speak to the entire group about Halifax and how we had money, how we have people, how we have approval, we have political buy-in, and still this is where we're stuck, and these are the issues, and these are the gaps for them to fill, right? So I think it's just that really exciting snowballing of momentum and awareness, and you just have more and more relationships and more connections, and we're getting deeper connected to insurance organizations and companies, and different types of utilities doing different things in other parts of the country, and even to other cities through the mayor being the Big City Mayor's Chair and the Global Covenant of Mayors. There's a lot going on, and Halifax is part of the mix. So I think it's something to be proud of.
I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Stoddart in a second, but just imagine, though, if we were starting today and we had another city doing the work that we're doing, how much that makes it easier for that next city to step up, right? Because of the work that we've done. So great job. We're very excited where we're going. Very excited to see where this next council will take this. And so thank you very much, Shannon. Councillor Stoddart, do you have the floor?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Shannon, first of all, I'm going to show off because my survey is done. It's done. Yay.
Thank you.
Okay, having said that, how do you deal with residents or others that say climate change is not real and that the 3% that we're taking is not worth it? I mean, do you ever get in those conversations with residents? I mean, we know otherwise, but do you ever get in those kind of conversations? And how do you, she's laughing, how do you deal with it?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, that's a really good question. I imagine you probably face that a little bit more often than I even do, but we do get some residents either directly through a councillor or through the 311 call center that just really want to speak to someone about maybe the climate action tax because it showed up on their property tax bill, or they've heard something in the news or whatever. And so we take the time to actually have those conversations. I would say that the good news is that I really think it's quite a small minority that doesn't believe that our climate is changing. There's just a lot of vested interests in what we do or don't do about it. And so as a team, you know, we need to stay strong. We need to stay positive at environment and climate change. We don't worry about the smaller group that are climate deniers. We kind of try and not give them airtime, right? Like we'll have a conversation with anyone in our community. We'll be respectful. We'll listen, but we don't try and actively change their minds, right? We're staff. This is our professional work and opinion, and we kind of just leave it at that. But really, there's a much larger group of people that just really want to know what they can do. They want to be empowered. They want to feel like what they're doing is helpful. And so that's why we're doing the virtual hub, a lot of these community engagements, a lot of this work to show that that they can be very impactful as an individual or as part of a volunteer group or a community organization, or even in their work probably, right? And we have those conversations even across the department staff at HRM. So yeah, it's not easy, but we take comfort in that there is a real much larger recognition and awareness, and there's fear. And so we try and talk a lot about like how to make people feel more empowered, less fearful, and to understand what we're doing and what others are doing to try and address the situation locally.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that it's only a small amount.
That's what I tell myself anyway. I think so.
You know,
Thank you so
Councillor
much.
Stoddard, if I may, and I think the issue is not the climate deniers. It's more of why bother here in HRM or Canada, for that matter, because the biggest polluters or impact to our climate is countries like China, you know, for example, in India. So I think that's more of the question that we get versus denier. Would not say Shannon, and that's a fair question, right? Because that's a versus the denier is a denier, and how can you deny what's happening? Just look at our own backyard. But that's the bigger question, Shannon. Is not what difference does it make in how in Canada, and what difference does it make in here, our little city of Halifax?
Yeah, and I think even if people aren't really leaning towards, you know, the public good and we all need to do our part and like all of the very good scientific reasons why every city, every province, every nation needs to do this, and very quickly, like we're tracking to a 4-degree overage, like not even 1.5 or 2. It's quite serious, right? And we're seeing these extreme weather events, and nobody wants more wildfires. Nobody wants their home flooded. I think talking about the economic opportunity and the social opportunities of acting on climate, and not really, you don't even have to say climate in a lot of it. That's what we've been kind of seeing shifting in a lot of political conversations at every level, is like, let's talk about safety and emergency preparedness. Like, okay, fine. Let's talk about dollars and growing our economy. Like, let's build wind, whatever. Okay, fine. You know, let's have more money in our pockets because we don't spend as much heating our home. Great. You know, like whatever your main motivation is, health, whatever it is, you can link it to climate. And so that's a lot of our strategy, is depending on our audience and who we're talking to, framing it in a way that maybe they can hear.
Yeah, excellent. Well done. Good question, Councillor Stoddard. All right, I'm seeing no other questions. If someone can call for the questions, we can vote on the motion on the floor.
Question?
Question has been called for. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And that motion is carried. Shannon, to your team, as always, I'm always impressed with your team. They're dedicated, they're involved, and they don't roll their eyes when I call them. So even to my face, at least anyway. So that's appreciated.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's move on to the next item, gentlemen. Keeping on the same theme, we're up to 13.1.2, Lake Watchers Water Quality Monitoring Program Report 2022-2023. And I believe we have Chris to be here. And there's a presentation, Chris, is there not?
Pardon me? Yeah, presentation ready.
Yeah, so we wouldn't mind getting that slide decked up, Madam Clerk, so Chris, and then we'll do the presentation, and then we'll put the motion on the floor.
I think I have the slide deck, if that's...
Oh, you have the power. Oh, look at that.
I think I have it.
All right, so why don't you share your screen?
How's that?
Yeah, we're not seeing you at the weekend cottage with your buddies. That's good. It's always dangerous.
Can you
Right.
see my cursor on the slide? Is that visible?
Yeah, I see cursor. Yeah, it's very small though. And I think Dorothy was pretty cool when we had the presenter earlier who can maybe show her cursor over. It's a little bigger. Yours is
Yeah,
very
I'll try to use that, but I'll just try to direct people's attention to things I
Okay.
want them to see. I'm just used to Teams where there's a laser pointer, and I don't have that here. So
The
So I'll just
floor
get
is yours.
started. All right, well, so hello and thank you for the opportunity to present on Lake Watchers today. As many of you know, my name is Chris Kennedy, and I coordinate the Lake Watchers program. I joined the Environment and Climate Change team back in February of 2023, and so I've been at the work on this program for about 18 months, and I'm the primary author on the report that's in front of you. So I'll be talking about that today, including some of the recommendations that have come out of the initial findings. And moving forward, we're aiming to produce annual reports on the state of the lakes. All right, so we'll start with what is Lake Watchers, and I'm glad you asked. Lake Watchers, first and foremost, is a community-based lake water quality monitoring program. And so what does that mean? What that means is that we're actively recruiting and engaging with residents to take part and participate in the water quality monitoring. And so pictured here, I have myself holding kind of an in-person workshop about how to use the equipment. So we've held both virtual during the pandemic in 2022, and then moving back to in-person in 2023. So here I am engaging with some citizens, potential volunteers, as well as I also go out with volunteers and provide in-person tutorials while collecting samples. So the program was initiated in 2022, and that was in response to a growing number of concerns around lakes, around swimming safety, increasing beach closures due to both high E. coli counts or incidents of blue-green algae, as well as increased growth of aquatic weeds and other plants. So I'd like to think Lake Banook, for example. So Lake Watchers is also standard. This is what we do: standardized spring and summer lake water quality sampling. So we've developed a standard approach that can be used both by consultants and volunteers. So we're getting the same data collected at all the same lakes at all the same places, and we do that both in the spring and the summer. So I've highlighted here the spring event and the summer, and this diagram kind of shows a basic diagram of how a lake mixes throughout the year. And so we're sampling both in the spring to get that lake when it's mixed, pictured here in the blue, as well as during the summer when the lake is stratified out by different temperature gradients, and this affects the density gradients of the different water columns. And we do this at 73 lakes across the region, and I have a map coming up to illustrate that. Lastly, Lake Watchers is a growing team of volunteers, Haligonians, that have given up their time to learn about lakes and volunteer to take part and help out monitor the lake water quality in their neighborhood or in their area. So moving on, here is that map I promised. So this map not only kind of shows how expansive the HRM is, but it also shows the broad geographic area that the Lake Watchers program covers as well. So we're covering a huge variety of lakes, everything from big lakes with relatively little development. And I'll move my cursor over here. You can see on the right side of your screen, lake number 48 here, Lake Charlotte is the easternmost lake in our sampling. And then I'll go all the way to the left side of the screen. Lake number 77 here is Wrights Lake, and it's the westernmost. So these are big lakes with relatively little development in their watersheds. But we're also sampling, as you can see, lots and lots of lakes, kind of more within the urban core and lots within Center Plan itself. And so lots of these lakes are smaller and are much more heavily developed. They're very hard to see in this map, but I've got Lake Banook here, number 10, Albro Lake 32 within these are in Center Plan, and Chocolate Lake at the head of the Northwest Arm, another lake we're monitoring that has a very developed watershed, and all lakes as well in between. So overall, the program is collecting data on lakes, big, small, shallow, deep, that are situated in a wide variety of contexts across the municipality. And this is to provide an understanding of current lake health in the region, but also to provide the ability to detect concerning trends in advance. And this could provide the opportunity to deploy proactive, adaptive management solutions instead of what are more often kind of costly reactive solutions. Okay. So here, this slide shows the growth of the volunteerism that the program has experienced. In the first year, spring of 2022, the entire program was administered by consultants to get the program off the ground. But we did have the goal by the end of the year to have at least 5 lakes monitored by volunteers or volunteer groups. And so you can see in the summer of 2022, we more than achieved that and had actually 15 volunteer monitored lakes. That includes what I call collaborative efforts, and that's when I pair a volunteer to go with the consultant team to kind of get a bit of an introduction and tutorial with the hope of kind of graduating those volunteers to independent sampling moving forward. So then you can see in the spring of 2023, still 15 lakes monitored by volunteers, but we were able to move, 2 of the collaborative efforts into the independent sampling column, which was really great. And then finally, by the end of summer 2023, we really saw the growth take off, with 22 lakes completely collected by volunteers. We had 8 collaborative efforts, which we hope again to graduate to independent sampling, with only 43 being completed by the consultants. So that's just over 40% of the lakes we monitor. So we're really proud of that volunteer that growth. And I'm also proud to pass along that growth continues into this past year, where we had over 40 lakes completed by volunteers. Okay, so now that I've introduced the program, what is it that we're looking for? The Lake Watchers program is mainly designed to monitor and assess for 3 key water quality concerns that are facing lakes in the HRM. And these are eutrophication, chloride enrichment, and bacterial contamination. So eutrophication, like it says on the slide, is the process of increased primary production, and this is typically caused by excess nutrients. So what this means is basically more aquatic plants, more algae. That's what eutrophication means. So lakes in the Halifax area are thought to have been relatively low in nutrients prior to settlement, and would have supported relatively few aquatic plants and algae as a result. However, as land use changed over time from kind of a forested environment to a less forested one, more and more nutrients are now able to make it to lakes, and this supports more growth of algae and plants. Second, chloride enrichment. So this is the process of increasing salinity or saltiness in our freshwater lakes, generally caused by de-icing salts that are used in urban environments. So the plants and animals that live in our lakes are adapted for life in fresh water. So when salt or salinity rises beyond what is naturally occurring, it can have a negative impact on those things. So we're talking fish, frogs, plants, bugs, whatever happens to be in the water or uses that water. So I bring the example, some of you may have planted trees or shrubs or may have had something like that along properties that along road fronts that get salted, and seen those trees or shrubs, not thrive or even die. So that's similar concept with lakes. Some trees and some shrubs can take that salt much better than others. And so as salt levels increase in lakes, it can reduce biodiversity. And in some extreme instances, chloride enrichment can actually interfere with lake mixing. Think back to that diagram I showed earlier, and we can always go back to it if necessary. And lastly, we're looking for bacterial contamination. And so you probably noticed the frequent issuing of beach advisories in July and August, resulting from high E. coli counts. And so the Lake Watchers program is also monitoring for E. coli just to assess how widespread that issue may be. All right. So how are we monitoring for these? The first way we monitor for them is by collecting water quality or water samples and taking them to the lab. So for eutrophication, we're collecting total phosphorus and chlorophyll A. These are standard parameters used in lake water quality monitoring and in the academic journals. So total phosphorus has been shown to be the limiting nutrient that limits plant growth in temperate lakes like we have in Nova Scotia. And chlorophyll A is a near direct measure of kind of algae content. And so by looking at these, we can assess eutrophication risk in lakes. The second is we look at dissolved chloride. So as you may or may not know, road salt, table salt is a sodium chloride. The easiest one for us to look for in water is chloride, and so that's our marker for salinity. And finally, when we look for bacterial contamination, we look for E. coli. We do this by using what's known as a Van Dorn device, which I've just brought up here. It's kind of a hollow tube with two snapping plungers on either end that can be set to collect water from from any depth in the lake. We use it to collect samples from both the surface as well as the near bottom environment, because this gives us an indication of changing conditions, especially during that summer stratification when the lake is broken up into possibly 1, 2, or 3 layers of water. So we collect these into special pre-labeled, pre-prepared lab bottles and take them to the lab for analysis. The second way is we collect some field collected data right in situ or right in while we're out on the lake. So this is done using a water quality multimeter. I've just brought one up here. They come in all shapes and sizes. We use one that looks very much like what you see here. And we lower the probe end or the sonde end into the water 1 meter at a time and collect temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, specific conductivity, as well as we use a Secchi disc, which I've just brought up, to assess water clarity. So this is done at 1 meter intervals and is especially revealing during the summertime when you can see the changing temperatures as you drop down the lake, as well as other parameters. All right, so now that I've gone through how we do it, what has the data shown us so far? First, I want to mention that what I'm bringing up here today, much more detail is included in both the recommendation report as well as attachment A to the report. Dives into all of these in great detail. So what I'll talk about today is really broad strokes, but I'm happy to go into any of it once the presentation is over. So first, compared to data collected during a previous water quality monitoring program in 2006 and 2011, the average total phosphorus levels in surface water were just lower than we expected. So anecdotally, residents are telling us that they're seeing more and more aquatic plant growth. This has been confirmed by some consultant studies like that done on Lake Banook and Lake Micmac. And so it was anticipated that most lakes would be showing similar or higher total phosphorus than was collected back in 2006 and 2011, and that's just not what we saw. There's a number of reasons for this, and we're investigating a few of them, including collecting duplicate samples at a number of lakes and delivering them to a separate laboratory to see if we have matching results. Now, the chlorophyll A results do suggest that lakes are experiencing higher nutrient levels than those observed in the average TP data, the average total phosphorus data. So we're getting 2 different signals, but anecdotally, we are seeing more plants. The chlorophyll A suggests that as well. And so it does appear that lakes continue to accumulate nutrients, which is leading to increased growth of plants and algae. Lastly, on the eutrophication risk, and this is a really important one, we found evidence of nutrient release from lakebed sediments during the summer stratification period. And so what that means is when we collect total phosphorus samples from the bottom of the lake versus the top of the lake, we're seeing more phosphorus at the bottom. And this is interpreted as it is being released from the lakebed sediments. And we know this happens under low oxygen or anoxic conditions, which we are seeing in many lakes. The second finding, quite important, is that we found 10 of 72 freshwater lakes that we're monitoring actually exceeded the average deepwater chloride concentrations. Pardon me. We had 10 of 72 freshwater lakes that we're monitoring had average deepwater chloride concentrations that exceeded federal guidelines for the protection of freshwater aquatic life. So that guideline is it's greater than 120 milligrams per liter. And that's intended to protect freshwater aquatic life from indefinite exposure at that concentration. And we had 10 of those lakes whose average values season after season was always above that. And so we do have 10 lakes where organisms are being subjected to concentrations of chloride we know that is harmful. And this could be affecting biodiversity as well as lake mixing within those lakes. I have those listed here. I won't go through them, but they're largely within more developed areas. And we have another 7 lakes that were found to be approaching this guideline as well. So yeah, like I say, these lakes and others with elevated chloride levels are overwhelmingly located in more developed parts of the HRM, where road salt becomes easily dissolved into runoff enters our stormwater system and is delivered directly to lakes, rivers, and streams. So the next slide I have here is a graph of average chloride levels across all lakes. I know it's hard to read. I just want to bring out a few extremes in this. So I have the CCME guideline here, the federal guideline for the protection of freshwater aquatic life. And yet there's the 10 lakes that exceeded on this end. And if you are able to read any of this, it essentially goes back to what I just suggested, that you know, overwhelmingly lakes with elevated chloride are located in those more developed areas. Most Nova Scotian lakes should have naturally occurring chloride concentrations around only 10 milligrams per liter. And in exceptionally coastal areas, this could rise to 20 to 40. And so you can see that we do have, and I'm going to bring my cursor back on the screen. On the right side of your screen, you can see many lakes are within that kind of naturally occurring chloride concentration. And these are all lakes that are largely outside the urban core. We're talking Lake Charlotte, Pine Lake, Scotts Lake, Kidston, Wrights, Echo, Hughley Big, Albert Bridge. These are all far from you know, urban developed areas, and so their chloride concentrations are all quite low. You know, whereas on the other side, I have Lovett Lake, Lake Banook, Micmac, Russell, Oathill, Bayers Lake, Governor's Lake, you know, First, Bissett, and these are all lakes that are overwhelmingly within the urban core of the city. Okay, moving on. And lastly, bacterial contamination. So the big finding here was that out of 616 samples, we only detected E. coli above the Health Canada guidelines on 5 occasions. And so I have a graph up here, and E. coli was not detected at all in nearly half of the samples that we collected, about 277 or 45%, and was detected below the guideline in 344 or about 54%. And these are often single and low double-digit figures. They're often not approaching the Health Canada guideline. And so what we're finding here is that, you know, E. coli may not be a widespread issue at all lakes or at all parts of the lake, because we did notice that E. coli was often detected more frequently and at higher counts at the near shore sampling locations versus a mid-lake sampling location. And so this wasn't entirely unexpected. Biological activity is usually highest in shallower and often warmer water located near the shoreline. And so with what we're seeing in the beach data from July and August, that has much more to do with it being a near shore environment. And we're investigating a number of possible causes of that. And one is, you know, waterfowl waste. Okay. So that brings us to the recommendations of the report. The first of which is to initiate a review of the municipality's current salt management plan, and guided by the synthesis of best practices of road salt management. So the municipality last reviewed best management practices related to road salt in 2011, and that was out of concern for lake quality. And as a result of that, some snow clearing equipment has been upgraded since, and other improvements have been implemented by the winter maintenance team. But there is now more up-to-date guidance and newer BMPs available. So our initial findings suggest that more salt vulnerable areas could be identified, and strategies could be developed to continue to mitigate the impact of roadway de-icing salt on lake water quality. And we have spoken to members of the winter maintenance team, and they're broadly supportive of this initiative. Right. The second recommendation is to investigate policy options for setbacks for new stormwater discharge locations into natural water bodies, as well as to consider options for naturalization or low impact development features at existing stormwater discharge locations around priority lakes. So there are many locations throughout the municipality now where stormwater is discharged directly into lakes, streams, and rivers. And so this is true of lakes with beaches on them and parks on them, as well as it is true of lakes that don't have those. So this means that anything and everything that goes down the street drain ends up in the nearest lake or river. And so by requiring stormwater discharge locations to be set back from natural water bodies, the flow of nutrients, salts, and other contaminants can naturally be mitigated by infiltration and uptake by vegetation that would naturally occur in those areas. in already densely developed watersheds. We suggest that a select number of discharge locations or in priority lakes could be identified for municipal-led naturalization projects or the installation of LID features that are designed to buffer the impacts of stormwater. And so in these instances, we're really looking for situations where we can make small changes to have big impacts on lake water quality. And lastly, we asked that the mayor to write a letter to the province of Nova Scotia's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, as well as Halifax Water, to support the development of provincial stormwater quality standards. Provincial regulation is needed to mandate water quality objectives for stormwater that enters natural water bodies. And currently, there are no water quality guidelines or standards for stormwater in Nova Scotia. Water resources and freshwater quality have been identified as vulnerable to the impacts of development and climate change. And so in 2021, the Nova Scotia government passed the Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act. Included in this act, the government's goal was to, among other things, was to develop provincial water quality objectives that would guide activities that affect water quality by 2026. Unfortunately, we've not seen much movement on that, and we fear that it may be stalling a bit. And so the idea here is we'd like to signal to both the province and to Halifax Water that the municipality is supportive of this initiative. So until the province acts and provides water quality objectives for stormwater, Halifax Water, in turn, cannot invest in any infrastructure that could improve stormwater quality. They can only invest in infrastructure that conveys stormwater. And so, yeah, just like that final bullet says, until the province acts, we're kind of stuck with the status quo. And that brings me to the end.
Chris, well done. Great work. I'm eager to ask a ton of questions here, but I have to go let my colleagues go first. Deputy Mayor, would you mind putting the motion on the floor and then you can ask your initial question?
With great pleasure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 direct the Chief Administrative Officer to initiate a review of the municipality's current salt management plan, guided by the synthesis of best practices road salt management. 2, direct the Chief Administrative Officer excuse me, to investigate policy options for setbacks for new stormwater discharge locations into natural water bodies and consider options for naturalization and or low impact development features at existing stormwater discharge locations around priority lakes. And 3, request that the mayor write a letter to the province of Nova Scotia's Minister of Environment and Climate Change and the Halifax Regional Water Commission, supporting and encouraging the timely development of provincial stormwater quality standards.
Second.
Second by Councillor Morris. I'll start your time now. Deputy Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Morris. Wow, Christopher, thank you so much for this presentation. I had the great privilege of going out with a volunteer group and spending 3 hours collecting samples in Third Lake. And the HRM equipment was so well marked and everything was amazing. But in some of the volunteer stuff, they had to use their own. So when I looked at the amount of time that our volunteers give, really, it's quite astounding, right? So kudos to all those volunteers. And if you ever wondered, what is the value of all of that work? Well, it's obvious in these recommendations, right? So all of this work's resulting in these kinds of really quality recommendations to for regional council to put forward. I think it's commendable work, Christopher. Very impressive. The one question I might have might be, and I understand because I sit on the Water Commission, is that where Halifax Water is a cost recovery program, even with the mandate coming from the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, like you said, we can monitor and work, but to make that investment, whatever that comes forward, it would have to then go through to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. So I'm just wondering, can you enlighten us a little bit more about what that path may look like and what the implications of that are?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. We're really looking at taking the initial step with this recommendation, recognizing that there will be many steps to go. Just
Right.
currently, with the current status quo as it is, Halifax Water simply cannot, even if they would like to, invest in infrastructure that would help to improve stormwater quality. They simply cannot. And so we're really trying to target that very first step with this recommendation, and to take away that hurdle, and then to start working on those next ones.
Thank you. Wholeheartedly support this. Thank you so much, Christopher. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Stoddard, you have the floor. Councillor Stoddard?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Chris, for this presentation. I agree with Deputy Mayor Kathy Pagel-Gammon that this is well done, and I have no problem supporting this. I just had a couple of questions. Like, I have had some construction lately around the Bears Lake, around Lovett's Lake and Governor's Lake. And I just noticed that the numbers are higher lately. And I heard what you said about construction residue. So because of the new developments in this area, would you say, I mean, you can't, say 100%, but would you say that the increase is probably from construction runoff?
That's a good question. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, could you clarify what numbers specifically do you mean?
I was looking at
probably chloride, I'm guessing.
Yeah, table 3, talking about fluoride. And bold indicates exceeding 1.20 milligrams/liters.
So I think you might be talking about the phosphorus numbers, but I'm not exactly sure.
Oh.
But what I'll say is that those lakes have had relatively developed watersheds for quite some time. So recent construction, while that would have an impact, especially if erosion control and mitigation measures aren't maintained and kept up after rain events, that those lakes have largely been impacted over time. This is a cumulative thing. There can be there obviously releases and sediment and large scale sediment releases can result in increases in total phosphorus, for instance. But in large part, what is and has been occurring in HRM lakes is a long process.
Okay. My other question was, in some areas, especially private roads, they use sand instead of salt. Is that something we could lean towards eventually, or does they have the salt when they forget the name, but at the beginning of a storm, is it brine?
Yeah.
And of course, once the storm is active, they use more salt. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if it's possible, but could we ever look at increasing the sand and reducing the salt?
That's a great question, and thank you for that. So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, sanding is one option that the winter maintenance team already does use, especially in areas where outside the service boundaries where residents are on well water.
Okay.
And so we've had some discussions with the winter maintenance team around options of using salt, maybe in around lakes where we know there's high chloride concentrations. But generally, what I've learned is that it doesn't always necessarily help. The sand is itself another potential pollutant and can carry with it other things. So the long and short of it really is that sanding is great, and we're using it in places where it makes the most sense. And they're using salt where it makes the most sense as well. The brining that you bring up is one of those improvements, both in equipment upgrades as well as implementation upgrades that the winter maintenance team has implemented in the wake of the last salt management plan revamp. And so I think it's a great example of the winter maintenance team doing some of this work kind of unto themselves. Spreading salt is expensive, and so using less of it saves the municipality money as well. And so there's a financial element of just spreading less salt, but getting the same melt effect. and brine is one of those solutions. And so, we're really happy to see it. That's a great example of, mitigating salt and salt runoff by using the brine in advance of storms. As well as, and I'll bring up another one, is they've begun using what's known as a pre-wetting system, where when they throw the rock salt, it gets sprayed with the brine solution at the same time. And that helps the salt to adhere to the road surface and reduce the amount that ends up running off. And so I do want to say the winter maintenance team has been doing a lot of this on their own and reducing their salt. And that may have an impact as we continue the program. We may see that. With only 2 years of data, it's hard to say, if trends are rising or declining yet. So I guess, I'll leave it at that, I think.
This is just a curiosity question, Mr. Chair, if I have time.
Your time is up, but go ahead, Councillor. Go ahead, finish your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been putting fluoride in the water for decades now. Is that something that shows up in your testing as high, low, or you're not concerned about?
So we don't test for fluoride specifically. So I want to clarify, we're looking for chloride. And that's that's kind of, it's the ion that we can detect most readily that coming from the road salt, and so we look for chloride. So yeah, we're not looking for fluoride, so I can't offer anything on that.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I have some questions first, and some comments as always, of course. And Chris, we had a conversation before we started the meeting today, and very positive feedback about this program. You talked about the number of volunteers and how they've increased and how the sampling has increased. No surprise, because people that are living near lakes or use the lakes are very passionate about the lakes. And, Councillor Dagan and I had a meeting not that long ago. We're very passionate people in the room talking about lakes. So, the fact that we're engaging our residents to help us with this is fabulous. And now the presentation that you received today, I'm actually really excited about this and where we go from here. Let's see in a particular order. So the motion today doesn't make reference to going into regional council. Shannon, do we have to go to regional council with the presentation and the motion? Just to clarify.
Mr. Chair, yes, I think you do need to recommend to regional council to approve these 3 parts of the motion. Dorothy can probably confirm, but that's my understanding.
I think she has her hand up too, that we might need to extend the time of the meeting, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. As that's the case, Dorothy, do we need to extend the time of the meeting?
Yes, that was why my hand was up, that we need a motion to extend the time of the meeting. And for your question in regards to regional council, it is part of the motion at the beginning. I think it's ESSC recommending to Halifax Regional Council.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I was just reading the 3 points. Could someone put a motion forward to extend the time, if that's okay with everybody, by Councillor Morris, second?
I move that we extend the time of the meeting.
Thank you. Second by the Deputy Mayor. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So that answers that question. So when we come to regional council, I do ask that we do your presentation again, Chris. We need to educate council on that. And obviously it's going to be the new council that's going to see this, because we just had our last council meeting. So the presentation, even that much more important. The slide that I really, if I had hair in my head, that would have stood up, was your slide on the elevated chloride level, because of the top 10 lakes, 5 of them are in District 6. And so, can you explain to us what does that mean? What's the impact of an elevated chloride level?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Elevated chloride. So, I mean, like I stated in the presentation, lakes are fresh water, and the animals and the things that live in them are adapted for those conditions. And so, naturally occurring levels in Nova Scotia are thought to be below 10 milligrams. Lakes that are more coastal could be as high as 20 or even up to 40. However, most lakes should probably be closer to that 10 number. And so when chloride gets too elevated, it can cause issues for a number of different organisms. I'm not going to pull out what might be in the lake, but ultimately some organisms can tolerate those increasing levels of chloride better than others. And so it can kind of change the community structure of what is living in a lake and what can live in a lake. And so it may not be always outwardly visible because you can't take stock of every living thing in
Right.
every single lake.
Right.
But we can say with some confidence that lakes that are exceeding this guideline that is a federal guideline that is intended to protect freshwater aquatic life, where it's consistently above that, we can say with some confidence that there are some organisms that are probably being eliminated from those lakes, particularly where those concentrations are highest. Secondly, though, the second kind of pernicious effect that chloride can have is chloride can artificially create denser portions of water column, particularly at the bottom. This is where chloride ends up. And so if you'll think back to the lake mixing diagram that I had up, lakes will mix twice per year. This is in the spring and the summer.
Right.
If the density of the water is such, because of chloride, is so dense, it can sometimes resist that seasonal mixing. And this just disrupts the naturally occurring vertical mixing cycle that occurs in a lake that should bring oxygen throughout the lake. And so it can result in these places, it can result in extended periods of low oxygen right against the lake bed. And that's when we see those increased releases of nutrients. And so chloride can kind of have this double effect of not only lowering biodiversity, but it can also contribute to eutrophication risk. It can result in more plants and more algae because it's preventing the lake from mixing, which creates the conditions for that lake to be releasing nutrients into itself. And so it can kind of create this vicious cycle of too much chloride can then lead to too many nutrients, and then it can kind of run away with itself. So chloride can be very harmful if not avoidable.
Yeah, and that's just confirming my fears. Absolutely. Do you have the ability to give presentations to these various different lakes associations, even giving this report and customizing it? I know you're only one person, Chris, but I look at those 5 lakes, for example. Every one of them has an association attached to them to be able to educate those folks too. So, maybe that's something we can have a conversation offline with you and Shannon. But I would really like to see those presentations. So you talked about in your motion about having a road salt management study, and in your presentation you talked about the impact of waterfowl waste. Should we be looking at the same kind of a study? Because we get I see Emma Waddy on the screen here. How many times do we talk about lakes and waterfowl, and that comes up? Should there be a specific study we should be looking at down the road around waterfowl when we're seeing an increase of waterfowl, especially these Canada geese, as lovely as they are, but we know, the impact they can have around lakes and in lakes.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. With respect to waterfowl, it's true that we do suspect that waterfowl waste around beaches specifically may be a contributing factor to the E. coli that we're seeing. And I'm sure you're aware that we piloted a naturalization project at Birch Cove on Lake Banook.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
to try to reduce the amount of space available to Canada geese. Canada geese and other waterfowl really, really like the same kind of lakefront properties that we as humans like. They really like, a grading slope, mowed grass down to the water. And this helps them to not only feel safe because they can see predators approaching, but they can also slip back into the water really readily. That's especially important during the same time of year when we want to be on those beaches, July and August, because they're raising young, which can't fly yet. And so they want to have easy access to the water. And so there is kind of there's an overlap of competing interests. The geese and the waterfowl want to be on our beaches, and we do too. So I know with Lake Banook, we have done that kind of marking study that can look to see what are the sources of E. coli, and we know that waterfowl and avian were a contributing factor there. And so it's possible if we were to look at other naturalization projects at other beach locations, that it might make sense first to do that kind of marker study to ensure that the E. coli is coming from waterfowl, and that the naturalization project could address that.
So that's, again, maybe a second item we take offline and explore that further if it needs direction from this committee or from council. My time is up. I'm looking to see the committee members. No other questions, so I'll carry on with my next 3 minutes if that's okay with everybody. So if this motion is passed today, it has to go to regional council. Does it come back, and maybe this is a Shannon question, does it come back in time so that we get it at budget time? Because there's potentially some investment that needs to be done here. So do we need approval of funds if if the report comes back and suggests certain things that has to be done? I'm concerned that we doesn't come back in budget time and then we're going to lose a whole year before we activate some of this work.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we need additional financial resources to flag in the budget process. And, you know, I'm not sure how much backlog there'll be for when new council starts again in late November, maybe, or December. But, you know, this would roll as it can into one of those hopefully early council meetings. But there's no, the financial implications section is moot because we can accommodate this early work as we are right now. So, yeah.
Okay, well, to stay there, Shannon, because maybe your question for you, the one recommendation in the motion is to write a letter. Would you be receptive to doing a presentation to the Nova Scotia Department of Environment and Climate Change, making sure that the deputy minister might be there? I doubt that we have the minister attention, but if I reach out to them, would you be receptive to have this kind of conversation with them? I think it's important.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and we've been in discussions with the Deputy Minister of ECC, and she's wanting her team to engage more deeply with ours. So we're really excited about that. Always happy to give presentations and have more communication with them. And they've been part of the work for the watershed management framework as well that Emma's been leading. So yeah, and Elizabeth. Yeah.
Great. The last question is, and I talked about the associations, but is there an opportunity to at least share this presentation with all the volunteers? I mean, to be able to say, thank you very much for volunteering. Here's the presentation that went to the Environment Committee, and here's a motion that will go to Regional Council based on their work, right? And the work of the staff.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, I plan on directly reaching out to all the volunteers. I do that pretty regularly. I commit to returning the results that the volunteers collect back to them as soon as I get them back from the lab. And so this will be one of those other opportunities where I can reach out to volunteers and show something like this presentation and any kind of pat everyone on the back for a job well done and to see the efforts and to see that see what it came to.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, yeah, that's enough for my questions. Nothing else for anybody else, so we can call for the question then.
Question?
Question and call for. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And anybody opposed? No one. Great work, everyone. Fantastic work, Chris. Well done, man. Well done.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on. There's no motions. There's no in-camera stuff. I don't believe there's any added items. The date of the next meeting, if necessary, December the 5th. And so we call for adjournment.
So moved.
And all in favor, we are now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. Sorry for the late delay, but probably because I talked too much because of my excitement for the work that is done both items. But well done, everybody.
Mr. Chair, if I could tell anybody